All right, looks like we've got a ton of listener questions about English and how it works in India with all the other languages there.
Mm.
You guys sent in articles and research, even a podcast debate. So I think this deep dive is going to be interesting.
Definitely a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say our goal here is to figure out how English fits in with India's other languages,
Mm-hmm.
especially with India getting bigger and bigger on the world stage these days. What do you think?
Absolutely. We're talking about how language ties into economics and culture,
Hmm.
even education and social mobility.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing how language can be so important for all those things.
It really is. One thing that really stood out from all the stuff people sent was this idea of English as the lingua franca. Like it's this
Oh,
global cheat code for communication and travel, even for diplomats.
right.
But how did English get to be so powerful? Like what's the history there?
Well, we can't ignore the impact of the British Empire. They really spread English around the world with their colonies. But the fascinating thing is how English has taken on a life of its own since then.
Hmm.
It's like a network effect. The more people who use English, the more useful it becomes, regardless of any empires.
So so English got a head start, but it's useful enough to keep growing on its own.
Pretty much.
Okay, I can see that. So that explains the global picture, but one of the articles mentioned English speakers in India earning like way more money. Is that still a thing?
Oh, yeah. There was this study back in 2011 that found English speakers earning um, like 34% higher salaries.
Wow, okay.
Now the exact number might be a bit different these days,
Hmm.
but the basic idea still holds true. Being fluent in English gives you a leg up in certain fields.
What kind of fields?
Think IT,
Mm,
finance, anything global.
makes sense.
Communication is key in those areas, and those jobs tend to pay better. So there you go.
So it's not just speaking English itself, it's the opportunities it opens up in those specific fields.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. But then what about people who haven't had the chance to learn English that well? Are they like shut out of those careers even if they're super talented?
It's a good question, and it ties into higher education in India.
Uh-huh.
You see, a lot of prestigious universities really favor English.
Really?
Yeah. All the textbooks and lectures, even the networking, it's all based around English,
Wow.
which makes sense for fields that are global, but it does raise concerns about fairness for students from rural areas or families that don't speak English at home.
Hmm.
It's like, are we creating a system where language itself becomes this barrier?
That's a really good point. So we've got English potentially giving people better careers and connecting India to the global market. But on the other hand, it's creating this divide within the country itself.
Yeah, that's the tension.
And what about this whole digital divide thing I keep hearing about? It sounds like you almost have to be fluent in English to really be a part of the online world these days.
It plays a huge role, that's for sure. You think about it, programming languages, all the software we use,
Yeah.
most of the content online, it's all in English. So that puts people who aren't fluent at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
They're basically cut off from a lot of opportunities,
Mhm.
from education to jobs to, just staying informed and connected, it impacts everything.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. Okay, so English can open doors and create barriers. I see. But hold on. India has 22 officially recognized languages,
Mhm.
right? Plus tons of dialects on top of that. So where do all those languages fit into all of this?
That's where it gets really interesting. Some people argue that English actually acts as a neutral bridge across this linguistic diversity.
Okay.
In a country where language can be a sensitive topic, English could, in theory, provide some common ground for communication and administration.
So instead of like pushing Hindi as a national language, which could lead to conflict with speakers of other regional languages, English is like Switzerland, neutral ground.
You could say that. But then you've got the opposite concern, the worry that focusing on English might actually cause India's other languages to fade away.
Oh, right.
Language is so tied to cultural identity. If kids today are mainly learning in English, are they going to lose touch with their mother tongues, with the traditions that come with those languages?
It's like trying to balance staying connected globally with protecting the heart of Indian culture. The tough balancing act.
Exactly. And there's another piece to this puzzle. It's the power of being able to think and express yourself in your mother tongue.
Hmm.
Studies have actually shown that people tend to be more articulate, even more creative when they're using the language they first learned.
Wait, really? There's research on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder, does that apply to everything? Are there some types of thinking, like scientific or technical stuff, that might be better suited to English? It's a fascinating question that goes beyond just language.
Yeah, it makes you think about how language and thought and culture are all like intertwined. And all of this is happening as India itself is going through such rapid change. It's a lot to take in, but something you said earlier really caught my attention. You mentioned a regional content boom. Like more and more Indians are online, but they're not necessarily looking for content in English, right? Can you talk about that more?
Yeah, it's a fascinating trend. There's a huge demand for movies and music, even news and educational stuff, all in those local languages.
Oh yeah.
And it's not just about preserving culture, it's a huge economic opportunity too.
Okay, so we've got this global English, the need to protect regional languages and this economic boom tied to local content. So how is India actually dealing with all of this on a policy level?
One of the main things they're doing is the three language formula. It encourages students to learn Hindi, English, Andi, another regional language. The idea is to promote multilingualism and try to bridge some of those language divides. But, the question is it working?
Yeah. What are the challenges they're facing? Like, is it even realistic to expect someone living in a village to become fluent in three languages, especially if they don't have good access to education in general?
It's really complex. The way the policy is implemented varies a lot from state to state.
Mm.
There are debates about which languages should be prioritized, and then there's the big question of resources. Are there enough qualified teachers to teach all these languages well?
Right.
It's a logistical challenge and a philosophical one too.
Yeah, for sure. And we haven't even talked about the bias that comes with all of this. I've seen it myself. This idea that if you speak English well, you're automatically smarter or more deserving of respect.
That's a really important point. Equating English fluency with intelligence is just plain wrong. It limits opportunities for people who haven't had the same advantages in learning English. It's a societal mindset that needs to change.
Totally. And this also ties into that urban-rural divide we were talking about. It seems like access to good English education is way better in the cities. Is that gap getting bigger or are things getting better?
It's a good question, and one we'll need to explore further as we dive deeper into this topic.
Man, we've covered so much ground already, and it feels like every answer just leads to more questions, but what I'm taking away so far is that this whole English language situation in India is about way more than just language. It's about economics and opportunity and cultural identity. The list goes on and on.
Absolutely. It's a microcosm of so many of the challenges and opportunities facing India today. It really is a multifaceted issue, and that's what makes it so fascinating. You know, the relationship between English and all these other languages in India, it's not static. It's constantly evolving and changing based on all these social and economic and technological forces we've been talking about.
Yeah, you brought up that digital content boom earlier, and it got me thinking, could that actually be a way to empower those regional languages? It seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Because the internet itself is so English heavy.
That's a great point. It might seem counterintuitive, but think about it this way. The internet has given people these incredible ways to connect with each other and create content in their own languages. We're seeing all these regional language YouTube channels and blogs popping up. There are even whole social media platforms that are specifically for non-English speaking audiences.
So instead of being left out, they're building their own spaces online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that creates a whole new market. You've got regional language content creators, translators, software developers. It's this powerful economic engine that's also, making information and entertainment accessible in a way that just wasn't possible before.
So the internet's kind of a double-edged sword for Indian languages, right? Like it reinforces English dominance in some ways, but it also gives these other languages a platform to fight back and have their voices heard.
Exactly. And it's not just an online thing either. Look at traditional media. Regional cinema is booming. Movies in languages like Tamil and Telugu and Malayalam are often doing better at the box office than Bollywood films.
Yeah, I've heard about that. That's pretty amazing to see.
It really is. And it shows how much people want to express themselves culturally. These films tell stories that connect with people because they're rooted in their own languages and their own experiences. It's about more than just entertainment. It's about reclaiming that sense of cultural ownership and pride.
Yeah, I get that. Which brings us back to education. If India really values all this linguistic diversity, shouldn't we see that reflected in the way they teach kids? We talked about that three-language formula earlier, but are there other approaches that might be more effective?
There's a growing movement for what's called mother tongue-based multilingual education.
Okay.
The basic idea is that kids learn best in their first language. And if they build a strong foundation in that language, it actually makes it easier to learn other languages later on.
That makes sense. Like you got to learn to walk before you can run, right?
Exactly. And there's research showing that this approach not only helps kids do better in school, but it also helps them develop, um, their thinking skills and even their self-esteem.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. So instead of looking at English and Indian languages as competing with each other, it's more about finding ways to make them work together to create a truly multilingual society.
That's the goal. But of course, it comes with its own challenges. One of the biggest is teacher training. It's it's really hard to find enough qualified teachers who can speak multiple languages fluently and who are also trained in these special teaching methods.
Yeah, and then there's the question of resources, right? Like, do all schools, especially in rural areas, have the books and the materials and the infrastructure to support that kind of multilingual education?
That's a major obstacle, but I don't think it's impossible to overcome. There are organizations developing low-cost materials that are relevant to specific local communities, and technology is playing a role here too.
Technology. How so?
Well, think about, language learning apps, online dictionaries, digital libraries with content in all these different Indian languages.
Mm-hmm.
These tools can help make learning more accessible, even in places where traditional resources are limited.
That's really interesting. So there's a lot of innovation happening, which is really encouraging. But even with the best resources and the best teachers, we still have to address those societal biases we talked about before, right?
Absolutely. Changing attitudes is essential.
Yeah.
We need to get away from this idea that English is the language of the elite, the only path to success. Fluency in any language, whether it's English or Hindi or Tamil or Bengali, it's a valuable skill.
It's about respecting all languages, not creating this hierarchy where some are better than other.
Exactly. And that's not just about fairness. It's about recognizing and utilizing all the talent that India has to offer.
So what we're really talking about is a fundamental shift in perspective, right? Seeing multilingualism as a strength, not a weakness, a source of creativity and innovation and connection instead of division.
You said it perfectly. And this isn't just relevant to India either. As our world becomes more and more interconnected, being able to communicate across languages and cultures is more important than ever.
It's like we're all becoming global citizens, but without having to give up our own, unique identities and linguistic heritages.
That's the beauty of it. The more connected we are, the more important it is to celebrate and protect our differences.
It's definitely a complex journey, and this conversation feels far from over, but hopefully we've given you some things to think about. What are your thoughts? Where do you see all of this heading?
It is a question worth thinking about. We've talked about the big picture stuff, like economics and culture and policy. But what does it all actually mean for someone living in India right now?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering too. Let's get down to brass tacks. Like,
Yeah.
imagine a young person, just finished school, lives in a rural village. They've got big dreams, but they might not have had the same chances to learn English as someone who grew up in, like Mumbai or Delhi. What are their options?
It's a tough spot to be in, isn't it? Do they try to improve their English, even if it means, leaving their family and their community? or do they focus on whatever opportunities there are within their own language? Even if that means they might not make as much money.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
It's a tough choice for sure, but is it always so black and white? Are there any new paths opening up that don't force people to make such hard choices?
I think that's what's so exciting of what we're seeing happening right now. Like, think about those regional language call centers.
Oh, right.
Companies are realizing that they can, find a lot of talented people if they hire folks who speak languages other than English.
Yeah.
It's a good deal for everyone.
So instead of trying to make everyone fit into this English speaking mold, they're actually adapting to the linguistic diversity that already exists.
Exactly. And it's not just call centers either. We're also seeing more and more online platforms that connect businesses with freelance translators and writers and content creators who work in all those different Indian languages. It's creating opportunities for, you could call it like linguistic entrepreneurship.
That's a really good point. So people are finding ways to use their native language skills to build careers and contribute to the economy, but it's also about more than just the money, right? It's about keeping those languages alive, keeping those cultures going.
Absolutely. When
Yeah.
people can use their own languages to create and connect and learn, it brings new energy to those languages and to the traditions that are part of them. It's like pushing back against the idea that there should only be one dominant language.
It seems like we're moving towards a more inclusive model where lots of different languages can exist and thrive together instead of just one language having all the power.
I hope so, but it's going to take everyone working together. Policymakers need to support multilingual education and help businesses that are using multiple languages. Educators need to be open to new ways of teaching that value the different languages that students bring with them.
Right.
And individuals need to check their own biases and really appreciate all the linguistic richness that India has.
That's a big task. But it does feel like things are starting to change. People are realizing that language isn't just about communication. It's about who we are, how we think, how we understand the world around us.
That's what this whole deep dive has been about, hasn't it? This whole story of English and Indian languages. It's like a tapestry woven from power and economics and cultural identity and people's hopes and dreams. It's a story that's still being written, and we don't know how it's going to end.
So, for you listening out there, I think the question to ask yourself is what role are you going to play in shaping India's linguistic future? Are you going to support multilingualism? Are you going to be open to all the different voices around you? It's a conversation worth having and a future worth fighting for.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, no matter what language you speak, your voice matters. Don't ever forget that.
And on that note, we're wrapping up this week's deep dive. We hope it's given you a new way of thinking about the complex and fascinating world of languages in India. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep that conversation going.